Hello, and welcome once again to Tyler Does Gaming. If you give a man a mech, he can blast for a day. If you teach a man to build a mech, he can blast for a lifetime. In this video, the first part in my Armored Core 6 Master Builder mini-series, we're going to discuss every single frame and internal stat of your AC in Armored Core 6. We're going to talk about every excruciating detail about these stats, including what they are, what part of the gameplay they affect, and how they interact with each other. I am well aware that this topic has been covered extensively on YouTube, but I've always felt that a lot of important details were missing. I promise you, if you stick with this video, you will learn a thing or two, and that's not something that I say lightly. With all that out of the way, and as you can see by the absolute girth of this video, there is a massive amount of information to cover here, so let's not waste any time at all. Starting from the top, looking at the frame parts, taking a look at the expanded stat screen of this headpiece. The first thing you're going to see is these four attributes at the top of the screen. This is the AP and the three defensive types. These four stats are present on every frame piece: heads, cores, arms, and legs. Additionally, the attitude stability stat is present on heads, cores, and legs. On the left, you will see how much the selected part provides, and on the right, you will see the total values that your AC currently has. These values on the right represent the accumulated total from all of your currently equipped frame components. Starting with AP, it's a stat you should be pretty familiar with if you've taken down the tutorial mission. It is essentially your AC's health pool. Not a lot to discuss with this stat, it's pretty straightforward. Next up, we have all three defensive stats. They behave the same, so I'm only going to cover them once. Things start to get a bit technical here, so buckle up. I've put this AC together with precisely 1100 anti-kinetic defense. I've built it this way to make the first example calculation a little bit more straightforward to follow. 1100 anti-kinetic defense means this AC takes 10% reduced damage from kinetic attacks. This can be broken down into a formula shown on screen, and the result is a damage modifier of 0.9. I have reset my OS tuning so you can see what it looks like here. The Trainer AC's Curtis Rifle's charged attack, hitting with an attack power of 689, you can see that the hit lands and deals 620 damage. With the defensive modifier of 0.9, you can see that the calculation comes out to 689 times 0.9, and that results in 620.1. With this example, the first thing you can see already is that the damage is rounded down to the nearest whole number. Using the same AC and doing the calculation one more time for explosive defense, you can see with 1079 explosive defense, the Trainer AC's rockets hit us for 376 damage. The P-20 MLT-04 rockets deal 103 damage per rocket 4 times. With 1079 anti-explosive defense, our defensive modifier comes out to 0.921. With this modifier, you see that each rocket should deal 94.863 damage. The whole salvo, being 376, is 94 times 4. Each rocket's hit is rounded down individually. And lastly, one more time to make sure that these defensive values maintain consistency at higher levels, here is another AC with the absolute maximum anti-explosive defense you can achieve at 1353. 1353 is a 264 damage salvo from the same Trainer AC rockets. 1353 anti-explosive defense puts us at a modifier of 0.647, which means that each rocket should be dealing 66.641 damage. 66 times 4 is 264. So we have now confirmed that this calculation holds true even for the maximum defensive values that we can achieve. Okay, we're not actually done with defenses yet. There is one last quirk we need to discuss. That quirk is how stagger direct damage and defenses interact. Once again, using the Curtis charged attack at 689 damage, factoring in the Curtis's direct hit modifier of 220, the damage should come out to 1515.8. With 1348 anti-kinetic defense in this tanky AC, our defensive modifier is 0.652. So then, in theory, we should be getting hit for 988. However, as you can see, this is definitely not the case. The damage taken here is 1,276. So as it should be obvious from this example, the Stagger direct hit damage is not a straightforward calculation as it interacts with defenses. Direct hits are actually partially defensive penetrating. The formula shown on screen is what it actually comes out to. To put this as simply as possible, the base damage of the attack is reduced by defenses. Any amount of the direct hit modifier over 100 is fully penetrative of defenses. This partial defensive penetration makes direct hit adjustment an incredibly powerful stat indeed, especially if you are facing a very tanky opponent. These formulas actually hold true when your defensive stats are below 1000. This means you actually take increased damage instead of reduced damage. So make sure you build with that in mind if you're making something very light. With all of this in mind, there is something very important I wanted to note regarding the power of defenses. Due to how defenses are calculated, each point of defense is stronger than the previous point. For an example of what I mean, let's say we have an AC with 10,000 AP and 1100 kinetic defense. This AC would have to take 11,111 attack power of kinetic damage to destroy. If you instead had 10,000 AP and 1200 kinetic defense, it would take 12,500 to destroy. The first 100 defense over 1,000 gives 1,111 armor points, or 11.11 armor points per defensive point. The next 100 defense gives you 1,389 armor points, or 13.89 armor points per defensive point. Taking this to the heavyweight extreme of 1,300 defense compared with 1,350 defense, the numbers look like this, with the final 50 points of defense giving you 22 armor points per defensive point. This is why some of the more lightweight, heavily defensive parts, such as the Basho arms, are so extremely strong that they will sometimes see use in PvP even without having a melee weapon equipped. Definitely something to keep in mind when you're comparing the last few parts to put on your AC. One more point about defenses here. Increased defenses actually cause ricochets to happen at closer and closer ranges. This chart was made using the Harris rifle, which has an ideal range of 195 meters and an effective range of 376 meters. As you can see, it's a pretty straightforward drop-off. Most notably though, right at 1,300 defenses, ricochets start to happen at roughly the halfway point between the ideal and effective ranges. So while defenses do make a noticeable difference in ricochet range, it actually isn't as big as I expected. Okay, we have finally fully explored defenses, and we can move on to the next shared stat, and that is of course attitude stability. The attitude stability stat can be found on the head, core, and leg frame pieces. Attitude stability might be a bit of a strange term if you aren't familiar with spacecraft or robotics lingo. Spacecraft attitude control is defined on Wikipedia as the process of controlling the orientation of a spacecraft with respect to an inertial frame of reference. What does this mean for Armored Core 6? Well, it's effectively this stagger system. Every weapon in the game has a listed amount of impact damage, and your attitude stability stat is how much impact damage you can take before reaching Attitude Control System, or ACS, overload. In the ACS overload state, this is where the direct hit damage modifiers come into play that we talked about earlier. Okay, finally done with the shared stats of the frame section. Let's move on to the head-specific stats. First, taking a look at the system recovery stat. System recovery was actually quite an enigma in the community for quite some time. No one really knew exactly what this stat was for when AC6 came out, and the context help for it was, well, unhelpful in pointing out exactly what the stat does. Eventually, it was discovered that it acts as a defensive attribute against status effects. There are two status effects in Armored Core 6. Those are ACS anomaly caused by fire damage and electrical overload caused by electrical damage. Determining the actual value of the recovery stat was quite a bit trickier than anything else up to this point. But with some big help from a friend, and getting roasted and electrocuted over and over, here is what the stat actually does for you. First, we'll take a look at the head with the lowest recovery stat, the jailbreak head at 60 recovery. Instead of showing milliseconds, this on-screen timer shows seconds and frames, which is very helpful for a lot of analysis. Using a single Bad Cook flamethrower, we reach ACS anomaly status in 1 second and 19 frames, or roughly 1.31 seconds. Repeating the same test with the VE44B head with its 154 recovery stat, we can immediately see the value of recovery in defending against status attacks. The single Bad Cook pushes us to ACS anomaly status in 4 seconds and 39 frames, or 4.65 seconds. I've made a chart here so you can see the direct link between defensive time in frames and each headpiece. In general, this isn't a stat you want to concern yourself with too much when building your AC, and as you can see, it's pretty clustered around 110. Any head in that ballpark will be fine for general use. In PvP though, if your opponent has been running a status effect weapon, it's probably a good idea to choose a headpiece with a higher recovery stat. Lastly, before we move on, there's a couple more notes about recovery. Recovery does not affect how much extra damage or impact you take from the status effects themselves. And as you can see here, recovery does not affect how long ACS anomaly status is active for. And finally, recovery also does not affect how fast you recover from partial status buildup. Using frame-by-frame analysis and zooming in on the video, it becomes obvious that the partial buildup bar is reduced exactly once per second, and by the same amount regardless of headpiece. This rate of partial recovery is rapidly increased over the first few seconds down to a rate of once per 20 frames. However, this recovery rate remains consistent for both headpieces. Something to make note of here, however, is that the relative recovery from partial buildup increases with higher recovery. Since heads with higher recovery will recover partial status at the same speed, you will actually recover more status defense per second if you have a higher recovery stat. And one final note about recovery here. The internal values have actually been data mined, so it makes it quite simple to understand. The base status defense is 500, and system recovery from your head is a percentage modifier on that 500. The stun guns deal 25 status per hit, and the Bad Cooks deal 30 status per hit. All of this is a perfect match for my frame-by-frame analysis. Next up on the list for head stats is the scan stats. These ones are all fairly self-explanatory, however there are some details missing from the stat page in-game. First, the scan distance is how far away an enemy or scanned part container in single player will show up on the scan. This is measured in meters. Next, the scan duration is how long the scan will remain active once you've detected something. This is measured in seconds. And lastly, the scan standby time is how long you will need to wait between scans. This is also measured in seconds. Quite notably, some heads, like the starter Finder Eye head, have shorter standby times than their effect duration. So, by repeatedly scanning, you can keep obscured targets in your sights at all times. Alright, now that we know what all these stats are for and what they do, there is one quirk that needs to be pointed out here. Despite what the scanning animation shows in-game, scanning is not 360 degrees. It is actually a 65-degree cone from the direction that your camera is facing. If there is an obscured enemy or object that you are not directly looking at when you activate the scan, unfortunately it will not be uncovered. And now we get to the final stats on the head parts, and those stats are weight and EN load. Since weight and EN load are shared on all parts of your AC, and they also affect a great number of things, I will be covering them in their own later sections, with weight having its own section and EN load being covered at the same time as the generator stats. You can, of course, use the chapters feature to find those sections now if you wish to do so. Moving on to the next frame part, the core. As you can see, the core has all the shared stats, AP, defenses, and stability, and then the core also has these 3 adjustment stats. These stats are some of the most interesting ones in the game as far as AC building is concerned, and thankfully they are also very straightforward to understand. For all 3 of these stats, you get a 1% increase or decrease for each point above 100 or below 100. The Booster Efficiency Adjustment stat is a percentage cost modifier for your booster's Quick Boost EN consumption stat. Values of the Booster Efficiency Adjustment stat over 100 will lower your Quick Boost's EN consumption from the booster's face value, and values under 100 will increase the consumption. Generator Output Adjustment is a percentage modifier for your generator's EN output stat. Values over 100 will increase your total EN output, and values under 100 will lower it. And lastly, Generator Supply Adjustment is a percentage modifier for your generator's EN recharge and EN supply recovery stats. You can see the EN recharge delay change on the right-hand side here, but the supply recovery delay is a hidden stat. I will cover both of these stats in more detail in the generator section. Okay, now we move on to the ARM parts. As you can see, the ARM parts have the same shared stats of AP and defenses. Notably here, the ARM parts are the only frame part that does not contribute to attitude stability. Instead, ARM parts have stats related to weapon control. First stat is the load limit. The ARM load limit is quite simple. This is how much weight your arms can handle before they are overburdened. I will cover weight and the overburdened effect on arms in high detail in the weight portion of this video. Recoil control is conceptually a very simple stat, but it is probably one of the most complicated ones to fully understand. At a very basic level, the recoil stat effectively means how much recoil your arms can handle per second. However, there is a quirk in Armored Core 6 that causes this to be a little less straightforward. What you're looking at here is 7 frames of a 60 FPS recording slowed down to 1 frame every 2 seconds. This represents a full cycle of the Chang Chen's firing pattern plus 1 extra frame of the next cycle. Paying close attention to the targeting reticle in this high of detail, you can see that after a shot fires, there is a short pause before recoil control starts to take an effect. This pause amounts to 3 frames of 60 FPS video, or precisely 0.05 seconds. Using a 120 FPS recording, I have verified that this 0.05 seconds remains consistent at the higher frame rate. This recoil control delay is present across all of the different weapon types that I have tested, which has been quite a few. Notably, due to this recoil control delay, all weapons with a fire rate of 20 shots per second will be entirely incapable of being recoil controlled. This is because the recoil delay is actually longer than the time between each shot. This means that weapons like the Hugh Benz will never leave the recoil control delay period until you stop firing the weapon. With all of this in mind, and our delay value of 0.05, we can break down how much recoil control a weapon needs into a formula. The recoil control required of a given weapon equals the weapon's recoil times its fire rate, divided by 1 minus 0.05 times the fire rate. Filling in the numbers and using the Chang Chen as an example, you can see that a single Chang Chen will take 120 recoil control, with its per shot recoil of 6 and its fire rate of 10. The 120 recoil control arms can handle the Chang Chen. Quickly one more time with the Curtis of 24 recoil and 2.5 rate, the formula is as follows, coming out to 68.5 required recoil control. The Basho arms with 66 control are not quite capable of handling the Curtis. The Curtis and the Chang Chen have the same recoil per second of 60. But due to the lower fire rate, as you can see here, the knocked arms with 87 control can handle the Curtis easily. Alright, now, if you are running a dual trigger build, things start to get a little crazy. If both of your weapons have the same fire rate, and you fire them at the same time, you can get away with simply adding together the required recoil control of each weapon. Using our formula, taking the Ludlow as an example, required recoil control of 80, you can see that the notched arms with 87 recoil control can handle 1 Ludlow. Using 2 Ludlows, you need to go all the way up to the VE46A arms at 170 control to handle 2 of them. However, I must stress this next point quite a bit, because it is very impactful. If you are double triggering and you fire your weapons at different rates, either because the weapons have different fire rates, or because you aren't pulling the triggers perfectly in sync, you will incur extra frames of this recoil delay. You can see what that looks like here, once again using the dual Ludlows and the 170 control VE46A arms. Due to staggering the shots, there isn't enough time between shots to exit the recoil delay. So, it is very important if you are double triggering high fire rate weapons to fire your shots in sync in order to minimize the recoil control delay frames. If you are double triggering weapons with differing fire rates, try to combine them with arms that are able to manage their recoil. I highly suggest testing this yourself by firing at a wall and seeing if your current arms can handle your selected loadout. A couple more notes about recoil before we move on. The added recoil to your AC is calculated after the weapon fires. What this means is that if you are using burst weapons like any of the shotguns, such as the Haldeman, Zimmerman, or Sweet 16, and you fire them at the same time, neither of your weapons will have the detrimental accuracy penalty of recoil applied to them. If you fire them one after the other in short succession, the second shot will be impacted by the recoil of the first. And lastly, how recoil affects shoulder weapons. Recoil from your shoulder weapons will affect your arm weapons' shots. However, firing shoulder weapons are not themselves affected by recoil. So definitely keep all of these thoughts in mind when planning which weapons to run on your AC. Alright, finally we can move on. Firearm specialization and its associated stat, target tracking. This stat assists your AC's FCS in locking onto your target. I plan to leave the specifics of this to the FCS section of the video. And the last stat for the arm parts, the melee specialization stat. This attribute is quite straightforward, and it is a percentage damage modifier for your melee damage. Every point of melee specialization above 100 increases your AC's melee damage by 0.5%, and every point of melee specialization below 100 decreases your AC's melee damage by 0.5%. These modifications affect melee weapons and unarmed punches. It's probably obvious, but it is worth noting that kicks are not affected by this melee damage bonus. Kick damage is instead affected by your AC's weight, which I'll get into more in the weight section. Also note that for this damage bonus, only damage is affected, not impact. Moving right along to the last frame component, that is of course the legs. The stats on legs include the other frame shared stats of AP, defenses, and stability, but also 3 leg-specific stats. The load limit is how much weight your AC can carry before being overburdened. I will cover the effect of being overburdened in the weight section of this video. Jump distance is how much extra quick boost distance in meters you gain when quick boosting on the ground. And jump height is how much height you gain when jumping from the ground. There are a number of hidden stats to cover for legs as well. First, let's take a look at kicks, how much impact and accumulated impact they cause, and also their attack angle. These values all differ depending on the leg type, with bipeds having 480 impact, 210 accumulated impact, and 75 attack angle. Reverse joints having 700 impact, 320 accumulated impact, and 55 attack angle. Tetrapods having 360 impact, 160 accumulated impact, and also a 55-degree attack angle. And lastly, the tank treads have 590 impact, 270 accumulated impact, and 45-degree attack angle. Kick attack power scales with weight, so I will be putting the raw data of how weight affects kicks into the weight section of the video. However, it is definitely worth noting here that reverse joint legs do have a 20% damage bonus to their kicks. Tetrapod hover speed differs from their ground boost speed, and this will be covered in the weight section. Tank treads have some additional mobility stats as well. Travel speed is the unboosted speed of tanks. High speed perf is a modifier on the tank's boosted ground speed. This stat is primarily why the Fortaleza legs are so fast on the ground. The high speed perf value is used for all ground boost speed on tanks, and I'll get into that in the weight section later. And finally, all tank leg parts have their own built-in boosters. The booster stats shown here will be covered shortly in the booster section. And there we are finally done with the frame section. We can move on to the internal components, starting with the booster. The booster has a very large amount of stats, and of course all related to movement. A significant portion of these stats are affected by the weight of your AC. For these stats, I will go over them briefly at a basic level, but the more detailed analysis of these stats and their interaction with weight will be covered in the weight section. Thrust is how much force will propel your AC forward when moving with boosters active. Higher values mean more boost speed, and lower values mean less boost speed. The thrust stat contributes to the boost speed values on the right, which is affected by weight, and will be covered in depth in the weight section. Upward thrust is similar to thrust, but it is entirely when boosting upwards. Also affected by weight, also covered in the weight section. Upward EN consumption is how much EN is consumed per second when boosting upward. Quick boost thrust affects your quick boost speed stat on the right, and again will be covered in the weight section. Quick boost jet duration is how long your quick boost is active for in seconds. Quick boost EN consumption is one that I touched on earlier in the core section. This is the base value of your quick boost cost, and is then modified by your core's booster efficiency adjustment stat to produce the actual quick boost cost on the right hand side. This is a flat cost per quick boost, not a per second cost. Quick boost reload time is the base time you need to wait between quick boosts. Quick boost reload ideal weight is the weight value at which your quick boost reload time will start to increase if your weight exceeds this threshold. Once again, this is covered in high detail in the weight section. Assault boost thrust is how much thrust is produced when assault boosting, once again covered in detail in the weight section. Assault boost EN consumption is EN consumed while assault boosting. Notably here, half of this value is paid directly up front, and afterwards it is the amount consumed per second. One final note here regarding assault boosts. When you quick boost during an assault boost, these bursty quick boosts do use your thrust and duration and cost from your quick boost stats, but not the cooldown. Melee attack thrust affects how fast and consequently how far your AC can lunge with an appropriate melee weapon. I have lots of data to talk about in the weight section for this stat as well. Melee attack EN consumption is how much EN is consumed by a melee attack. This is a flat cost, not a per second cost. And notably here, melee attacks that use your melee attack thrust can be executed without any remaining EN. On to the next internal component, the FCS. The FCS is a greatly important component on most ACs, and it also unfortunately has a lot of confusion surrounding exactly how it works. As always, starting at the top, first we're going to take a look at the 3 tracking assist stats. What do these numbers actually mean in full detail? Well, to begin with the basics, these range assist stats, in conjunction with the target tracking stat, which is provided by your arm's Firearm Specialization stat, are what determines how fast your AC can lock on to your target. These stats and their interactions have definitely been covered at length by other YouTubers, but I have meticulously analyzed frame-by-frame data, and I have come to some solid conclusions that I have not seen elsewhere. So, I am very excited to share my findings on this today. Just a quick note before we dive into the numbers. The lock-on speed functions the same regardless of which distance bracket you are in. What I mean by this is if you are using a close range FCS and are locking on at close range, you will see the same results as if you are using a medium range FCS and locking on at medium range. Okay, I have performed an insanely large number of tests with a wide variety of arms and FCS combos and analyzed them frame by frame. What you see here on screen is a small sample of the data I have collected, but it is more than enough to draw the following conclusions. Conclusion 1. If you are using soft lock and you are doing a poor job of keeping your target in the center of the screen, you will incur a penalty. This lock-on period penalty essentially reduces your lock-on time to the fixed value of 21 frames. Now keep in mind that frame-by-frame analysis is not perfect. The actual internal state of the information in-game may be slightly different than what you see on screen. I think it's probably quite likely that this value is actually 20 frames, or precisely 1/3 of a second. The highlighted frames to lock on the left is how long it takes to lock onto a target that you have centered on the screen. The highlighted frames to lock on the right is how long it takes to lock onto a target that is right on the edge of your screen. Notice how those values on the right match the ones on the left if they are over 21. All of the values on the left under 21 will be 21 in the right column. This penalty is consistent across all FCS and ARM combos that I tested. The numbers here really speak for themselves that this is a huge point for using hard lock. And I really suggest using it for most FCS and ARM combos, as long as you maintain your ideal range, unless you are absolutely perfect at tracking your enemy. Alright, conclusion number 2. The penalty of using hard lock is a fixed value. Soft lock time is 35% of hard lock time. The frames to lock in soft lock divided by the frames to lock in hard lock results in roughly 0.35 in every test, keeping in mind that this is only true if you are tracking your target perfectly, as per conclusion 1. Alright, conclusion number 3. The range brackets are a lie, or a half-truth at best. The true brackets, which I found through data mining and then verified in-game, are on screen now. 0 to 120 meters, 120 to 140 meters, 140 to 250 meters, and 270 to 390 meters. All FCSs are incapable of locking onto an opponent over 390 meters. When your distance to your opponent is in between brackets, it is a linear shift from bracket to bracket. For example, when using the P05 FCS, at precisely 130 meters, your assist stat will be 61. Special shout out and thank you here to the developers of the Dark Souls Map Studio tool for the ability for me to peek into the game files with ease. I wouldn't have noticed this quirk without it. Okay, conclusion number 4. The target tracking stat, provided from your ARM's Firearm Specialization stat, is a percentage multiplier on your FCS's assist value. What this means is that for most setups, your FCS, and staying in your FCS's ideal range, is significantly more important than your ARM's Firearm stat. This is due to how the Firearm stat on ARMS corresponds to the target tracking stat. It's pretty heavily weighted towards 100. With what I've learned from all of this, the only two ARM units that I would probably never equip anymore would be the Jailbreaker and the Wrecker. At least when using most weapons, since they are the only ARM units with a low enough firearm stat and hence a tracking stat to make a noticeable difference. Alright, conclusion number 5. This point is a direct analysis of a couple of very common setups. The first one I looked at here was the knocked arms with the P10 SLT missile FCS. This is an extremely common scenario, and you'll probably see people running this with an Aurora or Trano setup. Now, the conclusion that I've got here is that it is not really that good. If you're going to run this setup, I highly suggest that you run soft lock. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with a nearly full second of lock-on time. And I personally feel like 1 second of lock-on time is far too much for PvP. It would be very easy for your opponents to break that continuously and cause the vast majority of your shots to miss. The other really common setup that you see often in PvP is the Basho arms with the Oculus FCS. Now, the Basho arms actually have an 80 target tracking stat, so you can see the penalty is actually quite minor when paired with the Oculus, with only 21 frames to lock on in hard lock. And lastly, I feel like I kind of need a drum roll for this one. This is what the math nerds watching are really waiting for. Conclusion number 6. What you see on screen now is the lock-on time formula, where X is your FCS's assist value, Z, yes, I'm Canadian, sorry, is the target tracking value, and Y is the hard lock-on time in frames. To convert this to soft lock-on time, simply multiply the result by 0.35. Please keep in mind that this may be off by a very small amount if you try to analyze this frame by frame yourself, but it will be extremely close, less than a few frames off at the very worst case. One final note I have here regarding FCS assist and ARMS target tracking. It has been theorized by a few people in the Armored Core 6 community that target tracking from your arms also provides better bullet prediction when firing at a locked-on target. I honestly really like this idea in theory, and I feel like it would be a very cool thing to have them implement. However, after analyzing tons of footage frame by frame, I am not convinced this is the case. That being said, even with frame by frame analysis, this would be nearly impossible to disprove. I hope we can come to a solid conclusion on this in the future with more data mining, but for now, I think it's still an open question. Many long nights of research went into completely detailing how the FCS and target tracking really work. I truly hope some of you find this information useful. I thought some of these conclusions were pretty exciting. Okay, moving on to the next stat for your FCS. The missile stats. These stats are, thankfully, quite a bit more simple. They are a straightforward percentage-wise bonus or detriment to your missile lock-on time. Using the missile FCS with 150 lock-on, your missile lock-on time will be reduced by 50%. And of course, it should be quite obvious that the differentiation between lock-on and multi-lock-on is simply whether you're holding the button down for multi-lock-on. Moving right along now to the final internal component, the generator. EN capacity is how much maximum energy you will have to perform quick boosts, assault boosts, melee boosts, or vertical boosts in-game. EN recharge, in conjunction with the percentage modifier generator supply adjustment provided by your core, is what provides the EN recharge delay value on the right. This is the delay before energy returns when you have not redlined your generator. Supply recovery is the stat used in conjunction with the supply adjustment stat on your core to determine the delay before your energy returns when you do redline your generator. Unfortunately, the end result of this is a hidden stat, but it is quite easy to calculate. Your supply recovery delay will be equal to your EN recharge divided by supply recovery times the EN recharge delay. Using this core and generator as an example, we can see that the supply recovery delay is 2.91 seconds. Quite notably here, both of the coral generators are the only generators with a higher supply recovery stat than their EN recharge stat. Post-recovery EN supply is how much energy you will have immediately after waiting for the supply recovery delay when redlining your generator. Energy Firearm Specialization stat is a percentage damage and charging speed modifier for energy weapons. Every point change in Energy Firearm Specialization increases or decreases charging speed by 1% and damage by 0.5%. This means that with the VE20B generator, energy weapons will charge in half the time and deal 25% more damage. One small note here, with the buff to the Aurora shoulder weapons, they are now affected by Energy Firearm Specialization. They are not a chargeable weapon, instead their reload time is affected by the generator bonus. So with the VE20B generator, their reload time is cut in half. And lastly, we're finally getting to the EN output stat. EN output, in conjunction with your core's generator output adjustment stat, determines how much total EN output you have to support your equipped components. Backing it up to the basics here, every part of your AC has an EN load stat indicating how much that part will add to your total EN load stat on the right-hand side of the screen. Total EN load is then, of course, the accumulated total of all EN load stats for every part of your AC. And if you have more EN load than you have EN output, you cannot use your AC. There is another moderately hidden interaction here between total EN load and EN output as well. This is the EN supply efficiency stat. EN supply efficiency is how much EN you recharge per second on the ground. Fortunately, this is a very simple formula to figure out. EN supply efficiency equals 4.166 times EN output minus total EN load plus 1500. Lastly, for generators, the falling and floating recharge speeds. These ones are very simple. Free fall recharge speed is 1/10 of your supply efficiency, and slow falling speed is 1/20th of your supply efficiency. I tested to verify that this is consistent across all leg types. Alright, moving on. Now I realize these are not internal components, but I decided to make this part of the video anyway. The expansion slots, starting with Assault Armor. Assault Armor, when activated, actually hits 4 times. Despite what's displayed here, it does behave differently if you have a Coral generator equipped. Both regular and Coral variants are preceded by 2 hits of PA interference of 3500 and 4000. Afterwards, the standard Assault Armor does 1100 and 400 damage, and the Coral does 1400 and 520. Additionally, a standard Assault Armor has 230 direct hit adjustment, and a lower direct hit adjustment of 190 for the Coral variant. While differing in these other areas, they do have the same impact. Note that standard assault armor will be reduced by the armor calculations for normal and direct hit reductions that we saw earlier. And being coral damage, the coral ones are fully damage penetrative. Now, having said all of that, I do not find that this is a big enough bonus when running assault armor for me to pick a coral generator. However, if your build already has a coral generator in it, it is a very nice bonus. Next up for expansion slots is Pulse Armor. Pulse Armor, when activated, gives you a temporary shield lasting for 10 seconds and absorbing up to 3,300 damage. This time, with a coral generator equipped, it is only cosmetic. Next is Pulse Protection. Pulse Protection puts a stationary protective bubble on the battlefield, blocking enemy attacks from going through it. This protective bubble lasts for up to 25 seconds and up to 7,000 damage. And the last expansion slot is Terminal Armor. Terminal Armor puts a defensive shield on you when you hit 1 AP. It behaves much like Pulse Armor, but this time lasting only 5 seconds, but absorbing up to 20,000 damage. Alright, now that we've finally covered every other stat in the frame and internal sections, it's time to go over the effects of weight on your AC. The weight stat is present on every single part except for expansion slots. The number on the left corresponds to how much weight that particular part is, and the number on the right is the accumulated total of all the weight of your AC. The weight of your AC affects a great number of things, some of which you can see on the right-hand side expanded stat screen when swapping parts around, but there are also a number of hidden stats that weight affects as well, which we will cover in this section. Starting at the top of the screen on the right-hand side, we'll begin with Attitude Recovery. Attitude Recovery is how quickly you recover from accumulated impact. The Attitude Recovery stat ranges from 57 at 130k weight, all the way up to 150 at 40k weight. Testing this in-game using this stationary laser cannon on Attack the Watchpoint, I've made a chart on how long it takes to fully recover the impact at various weight levels. This chart should make it fairly clear that this stat has a somewhat minor effect, with the full recovery time ranging from 7.3 seconds at 150 attitude recovery, and topping out at 9 seconds with 57 attitude recovery. The next stat affected by weight is a hidden stat, and that is how weight affects kick damage. As discussed in the leg portion, reverse joint kicks deal 20% extra damage. This chart was made with data mined values and then verified in-game using bipedal legs and tank treads. You can see here that there is breakpoints at 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000, and 130,000 weight. With the most important peak being 80,000 weight, the damage per extra weight slows down pretty dramatically afterwards. Next, I'm going to cover all of the various boost stats that are affected by weight. Every single one of these was tested in-game, but also verified in the regulation file. First is regular boosted ground speed and aerial boost speed, which have the same values. This is a chart of the SPD booster versus weight. Your boost speed will change, of course, depending on the booster's thrust value that you have equipped, but the relationship that weight has to boost speed, and therefore the important weight breakpoints in this chart, will remain the same. The breakpoints are the minor change at 62,500 weight, and then the significant drop-off between 75,000 and 80,000 weight. Next is the quick boost stat. This time I've mapped it out on a chart with the NGI-001 booster, which has the highest QB thrust. Once again, I would like to point out that the shape of the graph, and therefore the important weight breakpoints, are the same regardless of the equipped booster. The first thing you'll notice here is that it has the same breakpoints as normal thrust. However, it's important to point out that the penalty for extra weight is actually slightly smaller, with a loss of speed for extra weight between 75,000 and 80,000 being 4% less than regular boost speed, and the penalty from 80,000 and above being 8% less than regular boost speed. Next, we're going to look at QB reload time. This stat is of course affected by not only weight, but also the QB reload ideal weight attribute on your equipped booster. The data shown here is using the Gridwalker booster with the lowest QB ideal weight value of 60,900. The QB reload penalty when being overweight is actually a somewhat interesting system, but thankfully also very simple. The breakpoints on the chart here are at 4,000, 10,000, 30,000, and 50,000 over the QB reload ideal weight. This next chart very quickly, you should be able to see that the breakpoints are the same, And importantly, the breakpoints are quite clearly fixed values of 4, 10, 30, and 50,000 over the ideal weight for the PO4 booster, which is 82,000. So the breakpoints come out at 86,000, 92, 112, and way off the chart. The most important thing to understand about QB reload is that it is actually a percentage-wise penalty for being overweight at these breakpoints. I have made a relational chart so you can see how much this percentage penalty is for each breakpoint of being overweight. Alright, now we'll look at another hidden stat, that is how weight affects assault boost speed. This one was quite a bit more tedious to collect data in-game. Since it does not show up on the stat sheet, I had to boost in-game and then look on the left-hand side. But looking at this chart, you should see it has a somewhat familiar shape by now. However, you should notice that the breakpoints are shifted a little bit from the other graphs. The breakpoints for assault boost speed are 40,000, 50,000, 75,000, 100,000, and 150,000 weight. Importantly, you should notice that unlike the other types of boosts, the penalty for going over 75,000 is rapid all the way up to 100,000. This chart was made with the Wurzel booster, however, just like the other types of boosts, the shape of the graph and hence the important breakpoints will remain the same regardless of booster. Additionally, while assault boosting, you take 30% less impact damage, and you also deal 20% increased direct fire impact damage. Direct fire meaning any non-missile, non-plasma, or non-explosive type weapons. Additionally, after you have emptied your generator while assault boosting, there is a 15-frame grace period before the assault boost actually turns off. And finally, assault boost actually has a cooldown period of 400 milliseconds. Another hidden speed stat is the melee speed stat. This one was quite a bit more difficult than all the rest to analyze in-game. I've used recorded video analysis to get all of the data points for this graph. Once again, you should see that it has a familiar shape with breakpoints at 62,500, 75,000, and 80,000. Notably, you should see that the fall-off after 62,500 is quite a bit more than other boost types, while the fall-off after 80,000 is slower than other boost types. Seems to me if you want to make a lightning-fast melee AC, then 62,500 is the target weight if you want to hit that important breakpoint. Next, we'll take a look at another hidden boost stat, that is the upward boost speed. This value is the same whether you are only moving upward or if you are moving upward while also moving in a horizontal direction. This graph was made with the Gridwalker booster. Once again, it has a familiar shape, this time being an identical shape to the quick boost graph, with breakpoints at 62,500, 75,000, 80,000, and 120,000 weight. Alright, next we'll quickly take a look at the tank speed versus weight. Due to the high speed perf stat, this is a little bit more complicated than other leg types, but really it's just using the perf speed as the base value for the weight scale calculation. As you can see, tanks have breakpoints at 50k, 75k, 100k, 120k, and 140,000 weight. Please note that the high speed perf value only affects ground speed, not aerial speed. And on to the last boost speed stat, the tetrapod hover speed. This one is actually really quite interesting and a very important departure here from all of the other boost speeds. The tetrapod hover speed is actually the same regardless of your equipped booster. This allows you to use some much cheaper quick boost style boosters while hovering, such as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 booster, without suffering any sort of speed penalty. Tetrapod hover speed has breakpoints at 70,000, 90,000, 100,000, 110,000, and 120,000 weight. Alright, that is all I have to say about how weight affects your various speed stats. I hope you learned something here. I certainly did when figuring all of this out for myself. Now we can move on to how weight affects your total arm load and your arm load limit, and how weight affects your total load and total load limit. With either of these overburdened conditions, you cannot use your AC unless you have the weight control OS tuning. However, I really strongly recommend you not do this as the penalties are quite severe. If your arms are overburdened, your tracking is greatly affected, with a actually noticeable difference with only a few hundred weight over the limit. And if your legs are overburdened, it will slow you down. You can see the amount of the slowdown on your boost speed stat on the right. Additionally, when your legs are overburdened, not only is your boost speed penalized, but your assault speed, melee boost speed, upward speed, quick boost speed, and also your jumping height is affected as well. Lastly, even with a small 10 weight overburdened penalty, there is an added pause when landing on the ground. You are effectively stunned when this occurs, unable to move, attack, or even quick boost out of it. This penalty alone is enough for me to avoid this condition. Alright, and with that, I am done talking about how weight affects your AC. And that covers every topic I have for this video. Today we talked about heads and how system recovery works, and also the quirks of scanning. We talked about how defenses work and their interaction with direct hit adjustment. We went over the percentage modifiers on cores. And also we talked about how arms tracking assists your FCS, and also how recoil can be managed and calculated. We discussed how all the different leg types work with their load handling, jumping, and kicking. We covered all of the different boost stats and how they are all affected by weight. We went over the insane detail of how the FCS works and how generator energy recovery works. And we went over a whole bunch of hidden stats on your AC, such as tetrapod hover speed, tank treads high speed perf, and how that works. And also how coral generators interact with assault armor. And many, many more things today. I, for one, learned a great deal about how this game functions when researching all of this information, and I will absolutely make use of this data when planning future ACs for myself. But for now, that's everything I have to talk about for this topic. Next up on this channel will be part 2 of this Armored Core 6 Master Builder miniseries. Much like the stat breakdown in this video, I will be covering all the stats for weapons next. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you learned something about Armored Core 6 today. I am really excited to hear about your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you learned something here, or if you liked the way it was presented, or any other feedback you have as well. Both positive and negative, please. I am still learning all of this as well, and my aim is to improve with each video, so I will be happy to hear anything you have to say about it. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day.